Welcome, students. We're going to be taking some notes looking at the post-World War II culture as well as the start of the Cold War. This will give an overview of how the Cold War begins in certain areas and also focus on some key terms. So go ahead and title this Post-World War II, Start of Cold War. Make sure that as you're taking notes that you at the end will take a photo of these and upload to Google Classroom. So the post-World War America, you'll have economic changes, a baby boom, and population shifts. I've underlined several key points that I really want you to take note of. The first thing with economic changes, there's going to be this conversion from wartime production to peacetime production. Now, if you remember before World War I and before World War II, we had peacetime production, which was turned into wartime production because of the War Production Board. But after World War II, we will take those wartime plants and start converting them to peacetime plants. So you'll have auto manufacturers such as Chrysler that used to provide services for creating the Jeep for military use, now be creating Jeeps for civilian use. You also have a rise in inflation because there's no price controls now. Now, inflation means that your money is not worth as much, and so people are able to basically create higher prices for goods, and so that makes your money not worth as much. During World War II, there was more government intervention to provide price controls to keep people from price gouging, but during the post-World War America, that's not going to happen. You also have an increase in consumerism, so people start buying more and more, consuming more and more, and so the 1950s culture and late 1940s culture really starts this commercialization of America that we see today. You'll also have the baby boom. You've probably heard of that before, baby boomers. That term has become a derogatory term today. If you call somebody a boomer, they were born during this time period. And I know that some of you have called myself a boomer. I was born in 1981. So I'm not considered a boomer. However, that's become kind of a term for anybody who thinks more conservatively or who's older or something of that nature. So population is going to grow by 30% more during this time period. And then there's also going to be population shifts. People are going to move from their rural farms out in the country over to the cities, to more urban life. This conversion from farm to factory. So you thought that the farms were shrinking after the Civil War for industrial work, and that's true, but during the 1950s that will increase even more. There will also be a move westward to California, the Sun Belt, so people are going to move less away from the East Coast and less away from the Midwest for more sunlight. So as you see right here, the birth rate is going to fluctuate. You can see that in about 1946, there's going to be a spike in the births that happen as soldiers come home to their wives, and there's more of a focus on building families and peace at that time. There's going to be more babies that are going to be born, as opposed to the 1970s when there was a lot of turmoil. People weren't having as many babies. So, as we mentioned, people are going to move from the rural, more the country, to the city. However, the city will only be able to contain so many people, so what we start creating is called suburbs. Suburbs means suburban, so it's the outskirts of the cities. So people are going to move from the country to the city, and then from the city to the suburbs. So these suburbs, for example, the Levittown, as you see right here, will create the cookie cutter manufactured homes that everybody will have pretty much the same type of home. We were able to do this because of a car culture that develops. You don't need a mass transit system as much anymore when everybody has their own car. Women remained, however, in the workforce, um, but not as many as during World War II, but definitely more than pre World War II. So women are going to be in the workforce, however, it's not going to be as socially acceptable to be in the workforce. So you have kind of this tension where women have the need to work, but they're not accepted as much. So moving outside of America to the rest of the world, this Cold War period is from 1945 to 1991. And though there is going to be a lot of domestic issues with the Cold War mainly is an international issue. So U.S. foreign policy is going to be containment. That's huge. We're not eradicating communism from Russia or eradicating communism from the world, but we are containing the spread of communism. So that idea of containment is going to be really big to Harry S. Truman with his Truman Doctrine. So when we say Truman Doctrine, we're talking about containment, that containment philosophy here. So this Truman Doctrine of containment is going to offer economic support to other nations. Basically, we're going to bribe other nations to become capitalist because we don't want them to be poor and choose communism. We want them to choose capitalism. Capitalism appeals to those who have the ability to become better and to progress as a society. Those who feel totally downtrodden and hopeless turn to communism. It's going to provide military training and equipment to other nations. We're also going to send troops if necessary. And so that's the plan of the Cold War. This plan called for initial aid to Greece and Turkey. So as you can see right here, even though the Cold War is going to spill over into Cuba in South America and other nations down in South America, and also to Korea and also to Vietnam in the east, Laos and Cambodia and other nations, really the start is going to be in the European nations there, such as Greece and Turkey, kind of that sub area there. So U.S. response in Europe, we're going to create what's called the Marshall Plan. As I mentioned, under the Truman Doctrine, there's this economic reach out of funds to nations resisting communism. So basically, we use $13 billion to aid 16 countries in their fight against communism. It's kind of bribing them to be capitalistic. We also increase in security measures. The CIA will be founded, and the CIA will be founded as the Central Intelligence Agency. It's America's spy network to protect those nations from communism. As we've talked about before, they're going to start off with protecting the German scientists from Russian kidnapping and such, but it's also going to spill over into other nations. We're also going to have the National Security Council, the NSC, which is going to provide those safety measures, again, for democratic, capitalistic nations to keep them from turning communist. You have two major alliances that form. You'll have the what's called NATO and what's called the Warsaw Pact. NATO would be the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is the alliance of U.S. and its free allies, versus the Warsaw Pact, which is going to be the USSR, which is Russia, the Soviet Union, and its satellite states in response to NATO. So once we create this NATO alliance with our allies, with our democratic, capitalistic nations, then Russia feels threatened, like they have to create their own alliance, so to speak. So you see right here is that the classic World War I / World War II alliances start to develop. You start having two sides. Instead of these nations being free of one another and independent of one another, you start having these responsibilities and these sides that people have to take. Anytime there are two sides that people take, there will be conflict. When there's third voices out there, it de-escalates the tensions. And America used to be that third voice, but now we're joining or creating these two sides. As you can see right here, NATO will be more in the west versus the Warsaw Pact, which will be in the east. So you have this geographical distinction that happens. Those that are in yellow are the free from these two sides. So Spain, Ireland, Sweden are going to be independent from these two sides. But the NATO versus Warsaw is going to split and basically divide the two sides. And as you can see right here, the number of free and fair national elections versus the number of national elections. So you can see how in the communist regions, they're not going to have elections versus the democratic nations are going to allow for elections. So Cold War heats up. So the first place that the Cold War sees some tensions is the city of Berlin. Now, as you know, the country of Germany was divided up into 4 sections. So this is the country of Germany. The Russians would have Eastern Germany, and the 3 democratic nations would have Western Germany here. But then the city of Berlin itself is also going to be divided between East and West. And so what the Russians will do is they will try to seal off from any type of transportation the capital section of Berlin, the city, which is within the Russian section of East Germany. So they're going to seal off through a blockade to keep people from moving in and out. And so what we do is, since people can't leave that section of democratic Berlin, we're going to airlift goods and supplies to that region to keep them from being starved out. And so you have classic examples of planes flying overhead and delivering goods. And so because the capitalist section of Berlin is able to receive goods, Stalin, the leader of Russia, will give up and he will basically take down the Berlin blockade, and tensions will cool after 11 months. Communists take China. The civil war between Chinese nationalists and the Chinese communists. During World War II, there will be a unification between the two sides to fight against Japan. And America will be helping China against Japan. But once Japan is no longer the enemy, America will side with the Chinese nationalists. The Chinese communists will not like that, and so they will create a civil war here. The nationalists fled to Taiwan. We still support Taiwan today. China does not see Taiwan as a separate nation. China today sees Taiwan as still a part of China. However, Taiwan does have their own economy, capitalistic, and they also have their own president. And so the Taiwanese are recognized by America as a separate nation. This is the start of the People's Republic of China. Basically, People's Republic means that it's communistic. It's this desire of Mao Zedong to make everybody equal, to have this cultural revolution, so to speak. And there will be some tensions that happen between China and the United States, especially in the East. Then we'll have the arms race. The Soviet Union displays nuclear power in 1949. If you remember, 1945 was when we displayed our nuclear power. So now you have this arms race that starts to develop. The Soviet Union, Russia was able to kidnap enough German scientists and able to create their own atomic bomb. So both sides are in this arms race to stockpile weapons based on this idea of MAD, mutually assured destruction. That basically, if both sides can have enough weapons, it will basically make them feel safe. No country would attack because they knew it would destroy them both. So you almost have this tense peace that happens because both sides know that they can destroy the other side. So there's almost this peace in destruction, which is kind of ironic. Dr. Seuss would have a lot to say about this. He creates a little book called the Butter Battle Book, which is an allegory based on this. And there's a little cartoon as well if you ever have the chance to see it on YouTube, which is pretty great. So those are the notes there. Please make sure to upload those to Google Classroom, and I will give you credit. Thank you.